Where can we feel connected to the London from over 700 years ago? This map shows medieval London around 1270 to its height in 1300, when it reached a population of 80,000. The centre is still the historic City of London, but there is a new power player in town, Westminster. Westminster is the royal hub, but the other major force is the Catholic Church, which dominates medieval London life. Here, every pink square is a church, and our first stop is a very old one. It's the former headquarters of a powerful institution, the Knights Templar. The Knights Templar were founded in the early 1100s in Jerusalem, the name coming from the proximity to Temple Mount, or the Temple of Solomon, which gives us the Knights Templar. And then in the 1160s, they built a church in London here. This is the oldest section of the church, built between the 1160s and the 1180s. This door is a fabulous example of Romanesque architecture, and you can see there's lots of these thin columns and they recess towards the door, and this makes it feel almost like a portal. And in a way, the church is a portal. It is meant to transport you somewhere else. It is a round shape to evoke the same round shape of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, to which the Knights Templar were called to go on crusade. If you visit Temple Church, you can still see the effigies of 13th century knights on the floor. The Knights Templar were ordered to be disbanded in 1312 by Pope Clement V. However, across London, other monastic orders were just getting started. These are the remains of the Elsing Spital, founded in 1331 by William Elsing. A spital is a shortening of hospital, and you may have heard of the area of London, Spitalfields. This name comes from the fields surrounding the former St Mary's Hospital, where you can still find some of the 14th century remains on display below the current pavement level. Perhaps not as medically focused as we think of a hospital today, but more of a refuge for the poor and needy. William Elsing died in 1348, a year that would prove disastrous for London. This is Charterhouse Square, a beautiful green space that was once just outside the City of London walls. However, below your feet here are buried tens of thousands of Londoners who died in the Black Death. The Black Death arrived in London in 1348 and killed about half of the medieval London population, around 40,000 people. A contemporary chronicler, Robert of Avebury, wrote that there were more than 200 bodies of those that had died buried daily in the cemetery, which had been recently made near Smithfield. In Westminster Abbey, over half of the monks living there died, and a large stone mass grave marks the site in the cloister today. Inside Charterhouse, a Carthusian monastery established just after the Black Death, you can see one of the skeletons exhumed from the nearby plague pit. It's a young man who had grown up in Norfolk and presumably travelled to London for work, only to be struck down in the prime of his life by this horrendous disease. While the vast majority of people were suffering, life was pretty good if you're a member of the religious elite. Just around the corner from Borough Market is a great example of this. This wall behind me was once part of the Great Hall of Winchester Palace, the London home for the bishops of Winchester. And it's hard to believe now, but this would have been a place of great banquets and real political power. Medieval Bankside was a pretty raucous area, with at least 7 brothels recorded in 1381. As a major landowner, the Bishop of Winchester was happy to take a cut from all workers on his patch, including sex workers, and so a popular, if derogatory, name for these women was the Bishop of Winchester's geese. The most powerful person in medieval London was the king, and his base was Westminster. Today, the Palace of Westminster is best known as the Houses of Parliament, the centre of our national government. Most of the buildings, including the clock tower known worldwide as Big Ben, was rebuilt after a huge fire in 1834. But amazingly, a huge medieval section still survives, Westminster Hall. This 1815 panorama shows the huge slate roof of the hall by the River Thames. The hall was first built in 1097 during the Norman period. It was the largest hall in Europe with a floor area about as long as 4 cricket pitches. The original walls survive, but the really impressive thing is the roof, rebuilt 1393, commissioned by King Richard II. The hammer beam roof was constructed by the chief mason Henry Yavelli and the carpenter Hugh Herland. Huge barges delivered the timbers from Surrey, bringing them up the Thames, all 600 tons of it, and it was assembled on site. Also worth noting are the 6 surviving 14th century statues. Originally there were 13 showing kings of England, commissioned by Richard II. They show Edward the Confessor down to Richard II. You've got to include yourself, right? Standing inside this space is awe-inspiring, not just because of the impressive architecture, but also because of the history that's happened here. This is where, most recently, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II lay in state, but it's also where King Richard I had the first recorded coronation banquet in 1189, a tradition that lasted until 1821. For a medieval subject, who wouldn't be impressed by this mighty room? Another medieval survivor that is so often overlooked is the Jewel Tower. Constructed in the 1360s, again by Henry Yavelli, this stored royal precious items and silver plate. You can get a sense of its position in the medieval Palace of Westminster here, tucked into the southwest corner of the palace complex. Today the Jewel Tower is managed by English Heritage, so you can visit inside, admiring the original rib-vaulted roof and these solid-looking doors. But on the other side of London, the remains of an earlier royal palace can be found. As well as the royal hub in Westminster, in the medieval period, kings and queens had palaces up and down the country. And in the 1350s, King Edward III had a manor house built here in Rotherhithe. King Edward III was on the throne from 1327 to 77, and this was probably a relaxing retreat for the king whose reign saw the strengthening of Parliament, the Black Death, and the start of the 100 Years' War with France. The king would arrive via a boat along the Thames, and the house was surrounded on 3 sides by the river. There was a great hall with a large fireplace, private bedchambers for the king, as well as kitchens and further buildings. But aside from being a part-time royal residence, it's not totally clear what the purpose of this palace was. One thought is that it was a falconry, a popular pastime for kings and queens. After the dissolution of the monasteries in the 16th century, this was used for various purposes, a pottery, and then lots of warehouses were built on top of it. Amazingly, right up until 1907, there was still a very tall wall that survived. But then in the 1970s, all of this was demolished and it allowed the site to be excavated and examined in the 1980s. Today, it's a park where anyone can wander around, maybe not realising there is this 14th century part of a royal palace. Let's get back in our royal barge, and from the East End, we're heading about 6 miles west to Chelsea. At first glance, it seems that we're looking at a royal Tudor palace, but this is a private home, built in 1988. What is genuinely old is the stone building attached to the back. This is Crosby Hall, built 1466 for John Crosby. A successful City of London merchant, John built himself a grand mansion on Bishopsgate towards the northeast of the City of London. In 1483, it was bought by the Duke of Gloucester, the future King Richard III and England's last medieval king. Crosby Hall survived on Bishopsgate until 1910. Having survived various threats of demolition, it was moved stone by stone to Chelsea Embankment. It's now a private home, but I was lucky enough to be granted a tour inside, so I can show you these photos. It's astonishing to think that this hall once stood over in the City of London and was built in 1466. Just imagine what these walls and the epic ceiling have witnessed. I hope you enjoyed this journey through what's left of medieval London. In the next episode, we move into the Tudor period, so make sure you subscribe for more of London's hidden gems with incredible history behind them.